us today, but again, good morning, everyone. Unfortunately, Chairman Tucker couldn't be with us, but I'm stepping in his place, Co-Chair Kim Porter. And I'd like to call the CMAP Regional Economy Committee to order. Please note this meeting is being live streamed. Members, in order for online attendees to hear, please make sure you unmute your microphone when speaking. Please identify yourself when making or seconding a motion so that the secretary can capture who is making the motions. For those attending in person, please complete the sign-in sheet located in the hallway before you leave. And if you wish to make public comment, please fill out the comment card and return it to a staff member. For those participating with us via Zoom, please keep your microphone muted unless you're called upon to speak. When appropriate on the agenda, we will request comments from those online, and you can indicate your desire to speak via the chat box. Staff is monitoring Zoom and will recognize you when it is your time to speak. And with that stated, Tony, please call the roll.
Sure. Adam Ballard. Bob Tucker. Caitlin Ritter. Excuse me. Cord Carlson. Darnell Shields. Dion Bowe. Joan Fox. Josh Potter. Kendra Freeman. Kevin Kramer. Co-Chair Kim Porter.
Here.
Christy DeLaurentis. Marissa Lewis. Michael Horsting. Peter Kretikos. Shannon McGee. Dr. Tiffany McDowell.
Here.
Tara Orban.
Present.
Tracy Sanders.
Thank you, Tony. We have a physical quorum.
Yay. And I do not see Adam Ballard.
Okay, so let's get to agenda changes and announcements. All right, CMAP updates.
Good morning. I'm Michael Brown, Interim Deputy of the Planning Division here. I have a few announcements that I'm going to go through so we can get through it quickly, and excited to get to our extended agenda for today. So I'll do my best to speed talk. This summer, CMAP released a new set of community data snapshots to help local leaders and the public track progress and make informed decisions in their communities. These data-rich snapshots, one for each of the region's 284 municipalities, 77 Chicago community areas, and 7 counties, summarize demographics, housing, employment, transportation habits, and other key details. This year's update also includes new data on people with disabilities and fresh land use and employment characteristic data. We hope you find these snapshots informative and useful. We've been closely following the Senate Transportation Committee hearings taking place across the region on transit reform. The hearings have provided local insight as the General Assembly navigates how to address the $730 million fiscal cliff and other reforms in the next several months. Speaker Welsh has also recently announced the formation of a working group focused on public transit. So we look forward to providing the working group with resources from our plan of action for regional transit to help inform their work. CMAP's Households Travel Survey, also called My Daily Travel, is starting this fall. The travel survey helps us understand how local roads, highway, public transit, bike lanes, and sidewalks are used today, and how they can be improved to make travel better in the future. We hope to hear back from at least 4,000 households in the region. The survey is by invitation only, and letters to selected residents across the region have started to go out this week. To prepare for this launch, we've collaborated with partners, counties, and municipalities on ways to get the word out to help validate our efforts. The survey will run through spring 2025. You can visit mydailytravelsurvey.com to learn more. CMAP is partnering with the Illinois Department of Transportation and the Chicago Transit Authority to improve I-290 Blue Line corridor. Last week, the CMAP board approved a contract to establish a corridor development office to improve coordination, long-term planning, and implementation. The partnership between IDOT, CTA, and CMAP outlines a unified vision and guiding principles to improve mobility and enhance safety and accessibility, among other improvements. IDOT is contributing 6.25 million, CTA 3.5 million, and CMAP 1.25 million to provide strategic support towards program visioning, coordinating and sequencing projects, developing funding plans, supporting coordination with federal partners, tracking progress, and strategic communication and messaging. As things get underway, we plan to share updates with all of you. Excited to announce the next call for transportation projects will be open on October 21st. CMAP has 4 federal funding programs that we facilitate to distribute dollars for eligible projects application. They include, number 1, Carbon Reduction Program, funding projects that reduce greenhouse gas emission from surface transportation sources. Number 2 is the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Improvement Program that's funding projects that reduce vehicle emission leading to ozone pollution and help relieve traffic congestion. The third program is the Surface Transportation Program Shared Fund that's supporting large projects that contribute to regional transportation priorities, such as bridge rehabilitation, corridor safety improvements, and transit station improvements. And the last program is the Transportation Alternatives Program that's funding non-motorized transportation projects that help complete the Regional Greenways and Trail Plan. We will provide additional information on our website as we get closer to the launch and announce it via our newsletters, social media accounts. So those are the CMAP updates. If you have any questions, I can take them. Otherwise, we can move on with the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Our next agenda item this morning is the approval of the April 25th, 2024 meeting minutes. So if everyone's had the opportunity to look those over, I am seeking a motion to approve the meeting minutes from April 25th, 2024.
Chair Porter. Quick question. Notice that the minutes state that I was absent, but I was actually here. So just a quick revision.
Thank you. And Tracy, I'll get you on there as well.
So we've captured the change in the meeting minutes, and so we're seeking a motion to approve the meeting minutes with said change from April 25th, 2024. And did I have a motion? Thank you. Have a second? Do you have any additional edits or comments? All right, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Thank you. That approves our meeting minutes. Next task on the agenda is new business.
I want to recognize that Dion Bowe has arrived. Welcome. Nice to see you. You're good. Perfect timing. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much again for being here. I know we've only seen each other once in the past few months, and it was quite a while. But I appreciate everybody being here today, because what we are doing is proposing some changes to our bylaws with a few goals in mind: flexibility and transparency. It's no secret, we've all had issues with quorum and in person, and we're all being pulled in a million directions. So we hope that some of these proposed changes, if are approved today, will help these meetings go forward, and so you can continue to add value to what we're doing here, and then also give you all an opportunity to work with the committee and others as well. So the two main changes that we are proposing, one is that we're going to shift some of the language from appointing individuals to inviting and appointing the organizations to be on the committee. Now, you may all have this question in mind, so I'll answer it first, but we will have time for questions too. But it will start with all of you in the room. And so I think what we'll think through next is some sort of invitation or some sort of appointed letter will come out, and we have to think through if the terms start over, et cetera. But we're going to start with all of you, but this will give you the flexibility to either nominate somebody else from your organizations or appoint somebody else from your organizations to attend these meetings, or also send a proxy as well. We want all of you here as often as you can be here to weigh in, but we also understand again that you're being pulled in a million directions. So that's the first proposal. are part of the proposal and hope that that gives a little bit more flexibility to what we're trying to do here, which is to get your valuable input on all of our work and your work as well. The second one is to change the meetings to workshops. And so we're proposing, and you'll see in the memo too, when we get to the proposed schedule, the next item, there's 2 errors in there. We're proposing 3 workshops throughout our fiscal year. And again, our fiscal year is July 1 to June 30. So we're just about 1 quarter in. We're proposing that we have workshops, and then there's 1 meeting a year that will need the in-person quorum. And then we'll approve minutes. And if there's any other things we need to vote on, that'll be the meeting to do that. We hope that not only does this create more flexibility for everybody, but also more transparency as well. We can hold the workshops virtually. We can invite more people that are just not on this committee. So if we want more voices for any of the work that we're doing, but also this is a 2-way street, I want to say as well. Like, we also want to ensure that you all have an opportunity to bring some of your great work to us as well and utilize either our workshop setup or otherwise to tap the minds around this table and others as well. So we wanted to give everybody some more flexibility and of course, make it more transparent and accessible for folks to weigh in on the work that we're doing. So that's the other big change and proposal there that would start after this meeting. And so we have the schedule laid out. And so that in-person meeting for this fiscal year we're proposing is March 22nd. It's also the same day as our climate committee as well. So it's our attempt at making like a committee day. So maybe you are all here in the morning. If you want to stay for the day and attend the climate committee, vice versa, we would love for that to happen. Those are the 2 major changes. And so hopefully that helps alleviate some of the issues we've had here. It also gives you some more flexibility for the work that we're doing. I'm happy to answer any questions about that, but this would be something that we do need to vote on and approve today, which is why I'm so happy we have a physical voting quorum. Yes. Could you use your microphone, please?
Oh.
Thank you, Marissa.
Hello, Marissa Lewis. This is a public board,
Yes.
or a committee of a public board. Does anyone besides the people in this room and the members need to approve bylaw changes, or is this it? Like, do
This
you
is it.
need? Okay.
The
all
quorum
right,
of the appointed committee right now are the ones that can do that.
cool, thanks.
I would invite my colleagues to weigh in if I am incorrect. I'm slowly approaching attorney territory and I am not. But no.
Neither
no,
am
but-
I. I'm
yeah,
not
but
trying to
yes,
gotcha. I'm
yes,
just
this-
curious.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be this quorum, and again, the ex officio members and now have the voting rights today as well, because they hit physical quorum, so it would be this group that would approve the bylaws.
Okay, not seeing any other questions or discussion. Thank you, Tony, for that discussion on the bylaws. And I am now seeking a motion to approve the bylaws as presented. Motion by Kendra Freeman, second. Okay, second by Caitlin Ritter. Do you have any additional comments or edits that are needed? All right, all in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. All right, thank you. Next agenda task would be fiscal year 2025 meeting schedule. We kind of talked about that, didn't you?
Yeah.
Briefly, did you have any additional comments or you want to move on to the next?
Real quick, there's 2 errors in that memo. One, I think at the top, it says we will hold 2 workshops. It's going to be 3 for the year. We're going to start there. And I think that the idea now too is the executive director, at the call of our executive director, Aaron Allen, we can cancel the workshop, or if we don't have agenda items, or topics, and also we can add more to that too. So we would invite you to, all kinds of workshops and discussions. But also, again, I want to invite you all and encourage you all to bring work to us as well that you'd like to get some input on from our committee as well. So the first error is that I said in there, it says 2 workshops. It'll be 3. We're proposing 3. And then that Thursday, April 24th meeting, the error in here is it says it's in-person quorum. That would also be Zoom. So we'll make sure that we update the memo. So there'll be those first 3 meetings will be held virtually. And then March 22nd, our in-person meeting. Yes, Tara.
Just a more general question. How do you see the format of the workshop change? I know the name is changing, but how do you see the format or the content changing moving forward?
I think it's to be determined. I don't know if the format or the content will change much. They will still be public. They will still be open to the public. So the public will still be invited to participate and weigh in. So take that into consideration when we think about what's on the agenda. But typically, I think what our role here, your role here, what we like from you is the value you add to the work, the policy, the programs, the projects that we're working on. We want your input on that, and then vice versa if you want to bring something as well. So I think it might be similar, but the caveat is we wouldn't be voting on anything. There would be nothing to vote on, and we wouldn't need the quorum because there wouldn't be anything we would need to approve. So we'd really then focus more on the projects and the programs and the policies that we're working on.
Okay, so the participants on the committee then would be informing policy decisions or programs for subsequent committees at CMAP then?
Correct.
And that's what the workshop would be intended to develop those discussions
Correct.
and feedback from the participants. Okay.
Correct.
So there would be nothing to approve then. That would be a major difference. So is would this still be subject to the Open Meetings Act?
No.
It would not.
My
Okay.
understanding is no.
Okay.
There'll be public meetings, but we would not need a quorum to present whatever's on the agenda. So
Okay.
that's
So
the major
that's
change here. Mhm.
But they still will be very much public in the sense of like the logistics of how we participate now or how there can be.
Correct.
The meeting will be recorded and
Correct.
available online after and
Mhm.
people can participate remotely.
Correct.
Okay, but should life happen and you need to phone in, you
Yep.
via Zoom, you can. Okay.
The idea is they would be held virtually.
Oh,
You all contact me and you say you want to come here in person that day, I will open up a conference room.
I walk here, Tony.
I know, right. So I mean, you are free to come here anytime you want, but I think. But I think the idea is we want to make this more transparent, more accessible for those who cannot come downtown, but still want to weigh in on either the work that we're doing and we need your input or something that you want to bring to the committee as well. And then we can also invite other partners as well as we talk about different topics. Yeah, so that would be, we're hopeful that this is more transparent and flexible from that standpoint.
Yeah, and it's such a diverse, talented group.
Right.
I'm very honored to even sit at the table with all of you. So look forward to participating in a future capacity that way. Thank you
Great.
for
Thank you.
answering the questions.
Just one point of clarification on the schedule for 2025. So we're looking at November 14th, January 23rd, April 24th, all as workshops via Zoom. And then-
Order.
May 22nd or March 22nd?
Oh. When's climate committee? March or May? May? I believe it's May. Yeah. Be the same day. Thank you.
No, thank you.
You can tell I do this all the time.
No, thank you for that discussion and point of clarification. So an action is required for this as well, everyone. We will need to vote on this for approval. So can I get a motion to approve the fiscal year 2025 meeting schedule as presented? Can I have a second? Thank you, Tracy. Do you have any additional edits or comments? With that stated, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Thank you. Our next task on the agenda is the Regional Transportation Plan. And we have CMAP staff that's going to provide an overview of the Regional Transportation Plan and gather feedback about key elements to include in said plan. This will be presented by Julie Reschke. Did I get it right? Policy Analyst.
You got it right.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. As the vice chair said, my name is Julie Reschke. I'm a senior analyst in our policy division. I use she, her pronouns. Today, I'll be summarizing some existing transportation goals as we head into early discussions about the potential vision for the Regional Transportation Plan, or as we'll refer to it, the RTP. We're very early in the development of the RTP, so we've been working on having these initial conversations with all of CMAP's board and committees. I know some of you have seen this presentation before, but we're very much looking forward to receiving your input today. Next slide, please. So as you may know, this is a time of significant regional planning for CMAP. In the coming years, CMAP will collaborate with the region to prepare a vision plan that provides high-level guidance about what the region would like to achieve. The vision will guide planning activities over the next 8 to 10 years with future action plans and strategies tailored to issues in transportation, climate, and the regional economy. This new approach will allow us to be more responsive to funding opportunities and rethink how we work with coalitions on strategic initiatives. We're just getting started on the multi-year process to develop the regional vision, and we're excited to share more about it in future meetings. But while this vision plan is being prepared, however, CMAP has a couple time-sensitive plans that are already underway because they're tied to federal requirements. One of those plans is the RTP, which we'll have the opportunity to discuss more today. Next slide. So as the federally designated metropolitan planning organization for this region, CMAP must develop a long-range transportation plan every 4 years. In the past, our transportation plans were included within the comprehensive plans of GO to 2040 and On to 2050. And specifically, the transportation plan was included in On to 2050's mobility chapter, financial plan, regionally significant projects, and relevant appendices. This upcoming RTP will maintain that same 2050 horizon year and must be completed by October 2026 per federal requirements. The purpose of the RTP is to be a forward-thinking plan that guides transportation investments, policies, and initiatives within Northeastern Illinois. And building on the foundation that was established in On to 2050, the RTP will outline a transportation vision that aligns with broader regional goals and reflects the diverse needs and aspirations of communities throughout the region. Next slide. To share a little bit of information about the RTP, it's guided by a few key questions. What's the future transportation system we want? What are the challenges and opportunities to get there? And how will we achieve the transportation system that we want? Next slide. Each of these questions are informed by different work streams within the RTP. So for the first question, goals and objectives and the targets and measures associated with them will help identify the region's vision for transportation. Next, for the second question, analyses of existing conditions and travel demand will articulate what's currently happening in the region, while analyses of future needs and the socioeconomic forecast will provide insight into what we're planning for. After this presentation, you'll hear a bit more about the socioeconomic forecast. And I just want to provide the context that analyses like these are helpful because they provide important context for how we can make strategic investments. So if we have a good sense of what's coming in the future, how can we think about making some smart transportation investments today to achieve the future we want? And lastly, for the third question, as goals, opportunities, and challenges are identified, the region can begin establishing how it will achieve its vision for transportation by analyzing and prioritizing capital projects, preparing a long-term plan for how we'll fund them, and setting strategies and implementation measures. It's important to note that some of these phases of work will happen continuously throughout the RTP development process. For example, the goal-setting phase that we're currently in will be fluid to account for new information we gain along the way through things like the existing conditions analysis and socioeconomic forecast. We just sort of wanted to provide this overview to give a sense of how all these different pieces of work are going to come together in the final plan. Next slide, please. So as we get into conversation about potential goals for the RTP, there are some state and federal requirements that are good to be mindful of. First, the RTP must align with federal goals to improve safety, maintain our infrastructure, reduce congestion and improve reliability, improve freight movement, promote environmental sustainability, and complete our capital projects on schedule. And per state law, the RTP must also reflect the relationship between transportation and land use, economic development, air quality, and energy consumption. And finally, the RTP must consider goals, metrics, and other details included in plans by local governments and transit agencies, which is a task that we've recently wrapped up, which leads us to the next slide. So CMAP staff recently reviewed and summarized nearly 30 plans adopted by the federal government, state of Illinois, CMAP itself, county governments, transit agencies, and other stakeholders in the region. Included in your agenda packet is a memo describing the process to review these plans and summarize the common goals, objectives, and strategies that we saw. On the screen are the overarching goals that were identified through the plan review process. And of note to this committee is the overarching goal to support economic growth and competitiveness, which speaks to objectives to leverage transportation assets like transit stations or multimodal hubs to promote local economic opportunity and prosperity. Taking a moment to review these plans revealed common themes across shared priorities. While not every plan that we reviewed includes each of the goals listed on the screen, the summary is intended to broadly represent the overarching goals that guide transportation plans in Northeastern Illinois. It's important that all communities in the region ultimately see themselves reflected in the RTP, so this was a crucial first step for us. Next slide, please. So as stated previously, the RTP will build on the transportation vision that was set in ONDA 2050. The ONDA 2050 comprehensive plan was originally adopted in 2018 and updated recently in 2022. In the plan, the region achieved consensus on many transportation priorities, which are reflected in all 5 of the plan chapters. Today, we'll primarily focus on the mobility chapter, which sets a vision of a modern multimodal system that adapts to changing travel demand, a system that works better for everyone, and a region that makes transformative investments. By reviewing the foundation that was set in ONDA 2050, we have the opportunity to consider how this upcoming RTP could build off these goals. Next slide, please. So as I stated, the mobility chapter in ONDA 2050 set a broad range of transportation goals that are represented on the screen. We have fully funding the region's transportation system, enhancing the approach to transportation programming through more performance-based criteria, evaluation, and monitoring. We also set the goal of harnessing technology to improve travel and anticipate future impacts and improving travel safety. Continuing to the next slide, we have some more goals of making transit more competitive, maintaining the region's status as a freight hub by not only promoting network efficiency, but also mitigating risks to adjacent communities. Also leveraging the transportation network to promote inclusive growth or more equitable outcomes in local communities. And finally, improving the resilience of the transportation network to weather and climate change. While ONDA 2050 goes into greater detail about actions that could implement each of the overarching goals that we just reviewed, the high-level summary represents topics where the region recently achieved consensus. And as we begin conversations about potential goals for the RTP, ONDA 2050 serves as a starting point for us to consider what the region's vision for transportation is today. So as stated previously, the RTP will not be a plan just for CMAP. It's a plan for the whole region. And it's important that all communities in the region see their vision for transportation reflected in the RTP. And based on the plan review that we provided a brief summary of and our goals in ONDA 2050, it appears that the region envisions a transportation system that's funded, coordinated, connected across different modes, safe and reliable, resilient to climate change, accessible, inclusive, and equitable, supportive of economies, and responsive to change and emerging technologies. As we begin considering goals for the RTP, we'll discuss how you would like the RTP to build off this foundation. Next slide, please. Since ONDA 2050 was originally adopted in 2018, the region has made significant progress in implementing its goals. On the screen is a snapshot of some of these efforts. Some examples include the Rebuild Illinois funding package that provided very important funding for our construction projects here in the region. We also have CMAP's Alliance for Regional Equity, also known as CARE, which is sought to make our investment processes more equitable and strengthen community collaboration. And finally, we also have the CREATE program, which has secured funding and implemented projects that are crucial to the efficiency of the regional freight network. While all of these efforts have been important for advancing the region's transportation priorities, they're just a handful of the immense amount of work that has been underway. And as we head into discussion soon, it may help to reflect on transportation progress made in your community. Is there momentum the region should continue or gaps we should think about addressing? Next slide. And finally, before we get into discussion, I'd like to preview some next steps. So having had some initial conversations with transportation implementers this summer, the RTP team will continue meeting with partners to have more detailed discussions about the potential vision and goals for the RTP. And later this year, CMAP will open a public survey to further inform our understanding of what the region would like to see. In the near future, CMAP will also open an online portal where agencies, organizations, or individuals can submit materials they would like CMAP to consider as they begin preparing the RTP. And lastly, CMAP recently created a website where we'll post updates, share materials, and opportunities to engage. The link for that is included on the slide here. So moving into the final slide here, considering all that we reviewed today, we'd like to ask you what you think. Are the goals that we reviewed still relevant to today's needs and priorities? Is there anything needed to move the needle and make progress? Or are there some emerging or evolving issues that are on your mind? So happy to take comments or questions that you may have.
Thank you for that presentation. I do have a point of clarification. So transportation was looked at like in many comprehensive plans within the ON to 2050 plan. And so is the need to extract that and create a standalone based on a federal requirement, or is this something, and I'm sorry if you said this and I missed this, or is this something that is a plan that wants to be at the forefront to expound upon that particular chapter? Does that make sense?
Potentially, I'll try to answer the question, and if I'm not answering what the question is, let me know. Having to look at some other relevant plans within the region as we think about the transportation goals is a requirement, but it doesn't need to be kind of its own standalone chapter or document as a part of the RTP. It was just some really helpful context setting information to understand what are the current goals so that we have a stronger foundation to work off of, just to see, where do we need to build on that? Are there things we want to change or adjust over time? Does that help?
Thank you. And a follow-up to that, in my previous role in local government for many years, is the hope that once this plan completed, communities within the region that don't have a transportation plan or one that may be outdated will review this as a document that they could use as some of a guiding document. I know previously in local government roles as planning director, I would look at a lot of CMAP documents. And so when it was time for me to update my local community's plan of whatever, I would look at CMAP and look at that and say, what is the region's goals? How does that apply here locally at that level? And kind of work with, our consultant, or if we're doing the plan in-house, to sort of align with that where possible. Do you also hope that other communities within the region that either don't have a plan or have a plan that may need to be updated would also utilize this document as such?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think we feel that would be wonderful if local communities were able to look to the RTP and not only see their aspirations for their communities reflected, but maybe some insights or resources that they could use in developing or updating their materials. I think something early that we've heard is that some have found it really helpful, not to 2050, that there's explicit recognition of the important relationship between transportation and land use, and they want to see that continued in this RTP. So absolutely, yeah.
Great, thank you. Do we have any additional comments or questions for Julie?
Christy De Laurentiis with South Suburban Mayors and Managers Association. So my apologies for being late. I wanted to ask, are you anticipating that you are going to apply any sort of constraints to the plan based on proposed funding or lack of funding? Just curious about that.
We're very early in the plan development, so I don't think I can say anything for certain at this moment, but within the RTP, there's a distinct project for the financial plan, so how we'll fund the investments that are described in the RTP. They will come to board and committees and provide updates or pose questions as they get underway a little bit further, but I could definitely mark that as a question that we hope to return to answer in the future.
Any additional questions or comments?
Just a quick question. You've said that you're early in the process. I guess, how much or how are you planning for us to be engaged, like moving forward as you all develop the plan? And then after that, I have one more question.
Sure. So we do have quite a bit of lead time for the RTP. I mentioned it has to be adopted by October 2026, so we have more than 2 years. I would anticipate 2025 being a more intense year of discussion where we'll be able to come forward with some more information and say, hey, this is what we found in existing conditions or the socioeconomic forecast. These are some goals, what's your feedback, some strategies. So I would anticipate throughout 2025 that we'll return with some materials for you all to review and opportunities to engage with us in discussion. Hope that
Okay.
answers.
And one of the goals continues to be more inclusive growth.
Mhm.
So I wondered, how do you, I guess, like, what's the sort of data analysis frame that you're going to apply in order to, because basically what I'm offering is you could actually, I can imagine you could do a racial equity impact assessment as part of this, which would help you in thinking through what communities and what audiences you want to engage. Because I see what was listed so far, but there might be other groups that we're not even thinking of that might need, especially given the breadth of the region. So that's it. I just wanted to offer that as a thought.
Yeah, that is very helpful to hear. It is included in our work plan for this project to do research and propose some recommendations around equitable investment strategies. Again, super early in the work, so we don't have, strong foundation laid out there yet, but it's good to know that feedback, and maybe we could circle back with you in the future just to learn a little bit more about what you're thinking.
Tara Orban from Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways. In terms of evolving issues, oftentimes as a transportation professional, we are left saying, well, we didn't control land use decisions. That's someone else. Our jurisdictional authority ends at the right-of-way line. But an ongoing issue that the region is faced with, and I've been at community meetings where members of, residents say, we are literally boxed in by freight. So, the celebration happens when there is, and I know the freight industry and freight clusters are so important to our economy, but in terms of, the results and the impacts of those land use decisions, how they could be mitigated, there's a tension between the two in terms of providing mobility and transportation options for freight, but also providing livable and thriving communities for our residents. So I don't have the answer, but definitely have been faced with the question many times in some public forums. So any, and to the Chair Porter's point about residents and communities in the region, any resources or toolkits in terms of understanding how we could potentially mitigate those impacts would be a wonderful outcome for some part of the study that's being done. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That's very helpful and definitely something we've heard in some early conversations, just the tension between some of these goals we have to support freight, but also make sure that we have inclusive and livable communities. We are intending to dive deeper into that. It's helpful to hear some resources that might be helpful. So I think we'll continue to be in conversation about that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you for that robust discussion. Thank you for the presentation. Our next agenda item and presentation will be the socioeconomic forecast. CMAP is developing a socioeconomic forecast as part of the Regional Transportation Plan. And this presentation will cover draft regional forecast results for Northeastern Illinois region, review some of the demographic trends, and discuss next steps in the forecasting process. Senior Research Analyst Alex Balls. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Alex Balls, him, Senior Research Analyst in the Research Analysis and Program Division and the Project Manager for the Socioeconomic Forecast. Next slide. Then next slide. So the socioeconomic forecast is a federally required part of the Regional Transportation Plan. You can see the language here, but the main takeaway is we need to forecast transportation and land use conditions to at least a 20-year planning horizon. As Julie mentioned, for this plan, we'll be going to the year 2050. So all MPOs end up doing a forecast. There are differences in how they do that, but they generally include the main two elements. The first being a regional forecast, which is going to be the focus of what we're talking about today. That looks at the number of people, households, and jobs in the 7-county region through the year 2050. And then there's a second component, which is the local forecast, which kind of allocates those people and jobs and households throughout the region down to the census block to municipalities. And that's based on current knowledge, policy considerations, stakeholder input, things like local zoning. But as mentioned, we recently finished a draft of the regional forecast, and we're going to focus on that for this presentation, but the local forecast is still kind of in the process of being developed. Next slide. So talking a little bit about how the forecast fits into the rest of the transportation plan. I know there was a question about some of the constraints in the financial plan. The forecast is part of that. Understanding how many people might be in the region helps us understand the resources we will have to invest. It's also part of the scenario planning process, thinking about different ways that the region could develop, different levels of growth, and what that might look like and how we incorporate that into our planning. It's used as part of the travel modeling. Understanding kind of where people live is a helpful part of understanding the impact of different transportation investments. And it's also helpful for stakeholder engagement, helping different stakeholders understand kind of where the region is heading and what we might want to do, or like what policies we might want to adopt because of that. Next slide. So the regional forecast primarily forecasts the three major components of population change, those being the number of births, the number of deaths, and the number of people moving in and out of the region. We will also forecast the number of jobs in the region, and you can see these slides with the note show that the migration and jobs are by far the hardest part of this process to estimate and the most variable. And we'll kind of talk a little bit more about how we forecast migration in a second. Next slide. So the US Census puts out demographic projections for things like birth rate and mortality rates through the end of our forecast horizon. And we use those and adjust them based on some of the historical data we have for a region about birth rate and mortality rate and how those compare to the nation as a whole. And that gives us kind of our labor supply. And so we then purchase a jobs forecast from Moody's Analytics, one of the kind of industry leaders in this type of economic forecasting. And in combination with some other economic data like the unemployment rate projections and labor force participation rate projections, we get a sense of what the labor demand will be. And the migration process is essentially a balancing between the labor demand and supply. So if we think that after going through kind of our birth rate and mortality rate, that we'll have a labor demand and or labor supply. If the labor demand is higher, then we think that people will move here to fill jobs. And when they move here, they might bring other people in their household that may or may not be in the labor force. But the primary way that migration is projected is kind of balancing this labor supply and demand. Next slide. And we do just want to kind of outline some of the many inputs that go into this jobs forecast. We think one of the advantages of working with kind of industry experts here is that they're able to incorporate a lot of different data beyond just things like population. And so they're looking at federal funds rate, things like home sales, consumer spending, different surveys of employers to try to get a better understanding of kind of where our economy is now and what that might look like in the future. And so there's a lot of different inputs, and we think that Moody's does a good job of kind of holistically addressing a lot of the components that might impact our economy going forward. Next slide. So we want to provide a little bit of context and some about where forecasts have been headed kind of at the national level and at the state level as we look at how our forecast kind of fits into those components. So next slide. So every 3 to 5 years, the census produces a projection of a population projection just at the national level. In the past few years, the measured population has been much 2019, 2020, and 2021 saw 100 years lows in population growth, which is really since we've been tracking this every year. 2021 was the first time we had less than a 1 million increase. And so at the national level, we are seeing lower levels of population growth than we've really seen any time in our lifetimes. As mentioned, the census does different population projections every 3 to 5 years. The 2023 projection was substantially lower than the previous projections they had done, and notably beyond our forecast horizon, but the census for the first time is projecting a population decline in the United States in the year 2080. And for the year 2050, just looking at the national population, the census forecast that most recently came out was 28 million fewer than it was when it came out in 2018. Next slide. So this slide shows our draft regional forecast in comparison with some of the previous forecasts that CMAP have done. So the blue bars are just the measured population according to the census. The dark green bar on the far left is the CMAP forecast that was adopted in 2018. The middle green bar is the forecast adopted in 2022. And this far right bar is our current 2024 draft forecast, which will change as some of the inputs are updated. So I'll pause a second for people to take this in. So the major takeaway from this is that we expect our region to continue growing, but that growth will be at a smaller rate than it has been in the past and smaller than our previous socioeconomic projections. This is due to fewer births in the region. The job forecast that we purchased from Moody's has been lower in recent years than it has been prior. And these are following some of the national trends that we've seen at the census level about things like birth rate and mortality rate. One thing to note, as we said, migration is one of the hardest to predict, and it's one of the driving forces of growth in our region. And we'll talk about that more in a second. Next slide. So looking a little bit kind of under the hood of population totals, there are some important demographic shifts we're seeing. So the population of the country and the region is getting older. In 2030, for the first time, people over 65 will outnumber people under 18. And that disparity will kind of grow as time goes on. The nation will continue getting older. This has important impacts for things in planning, such as school enrollment, travel behavior, and demand for medical services. Next slide. This slide shows at the national level the comparison between what's called natural change. So that's kind of the change in the population if there was no migration. So the number of people born minus the people that are expected to die. And the green bar shows the net international migration. So starting in the year 2038, the population is projected to decline absent migration. And at that point, migration will be the primary driver of growth in the country. And so this just highlights the importance of migration, international migration for the country's growth. And that is very variable based on a number of different factors. Next slide. So some additional context, the CMAP region grew at about 3.5% between 2000 and 2010. The subsequent decade, the growth rate was about half of that. In addition to CMAP, the Illinois Department of Public Health and the state demographer do a forecast for our region. It's just at the county level and it only goes through 2035. But they are forecasting a decrease in population both for the state and our region. A lot of that is due to a population decline in Cook County, but they are projecting population increases in the collar counties. And so while our forecast is that we will have positive but slow growth, there's definitely a world where the region's population starts declining as soon as 2035. Next slide. This is just showing we've been in conversation with many of our kind of peer MPOs and other MPOs of similar sized region, and they're seeing a lot of the same trends we are. And so our projected growth rate through 2050 is actually not that much lower than our growth rate between 2010 and 2020. But many other MPOs around the country are seeing that they're forecasting that future growth rates will be lower than the growth rates they've seen in previous decades. And some places are even already projecting a population decline in their regions going forward. Next slide. So talking a little bit about next steps, we've met with our technical advisor group, but are still reviewing our regional forecast results. As mentioned, those will definitely kind of change at minimum as some of the inputs get updated. For example, a more up-to-date jobs forecast. We're meeting with our local advisory group, which has representatives from COGS and COMS around the region that are helping us work on the local forecast and understand kind of the conditions that they're seeing and how we can incorporate that into our forecasting process. We're also working with a consultant called Urban Sim on our local forecast. And we're in the process of developing a vision plan that involves scenario planning, where, as mentioned, we can kind of think about different possible futures that might be in store for our region and how we can plan in a way that we are prepared for as many of them as possible. Next slide. Briefly, this is just the members of our technical advisory group. We think these are some of the kind of the leading demographic and forecasting experts in our region and in the Midwest. Next slide. And this shows some of the representatives of our local advisory group. And if you have any questions about getting more involved or in touch with that group, we'd be happy to help set that up. Next slide. And yeah, thank you. And I can take any questions or comments.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments?
Caitlin Ritter with Transwestern. So I think the problem with forecasting is you're always looking at what's happened in the past and assuming that trend's going to continue in the future. Obviously, that's a limit for all forecasting. But what I don't see any mention of, and I think is going to be like the hugest issue of the future, is climate migration, particularly state to state climate migration, right? We somewhat control policy that limits or allows international migration, but there's nothing to stop anyone from, moving within the nation. So I think it would be really smart to have as many people who are experts in climate migration as possible, because I think you're actually going to see, based on my research, the opposite of what you're forecasting. I think we're going to see huge growth. Maybe I'm just too much of a Chicagoan, but that's what I'm seeing.
And that's definitely something we've talked about a lot and will be a major part of our vision plan, because we mentioned there's a lot of variability here. We've talked with Moody's and worked with them, and they are including some of the climate migration stuff in the modeling that they're doing. Some of what they're seeing is kind of that the region as a whole is, relatively well situated for climate change, but compared to some other regions is kind of not as well off. I think there's concerns that kind of the impact on agriculture in the region and concerns about access to water, even though we are kind of by Lake Michigan, and that they kind of expect climate migration to happen, but not at the scale that would kind of change the overall story for the region. And they expect a lot of it to happen after 2050. And so because we're only going through 2050, that's kind of what their experts have concluded. But it's definitely something that we're thinking about and continuing to evaluate.
Can I ask what region they think is going to be better than our region? Because
it varies. The Pacific Northwest does very well in these models, and places like Michigan, but I think they also think that, if you have people from Florida that are perhaps impacted by climate change aren't necessarily going to move to Chicago. They might move more inland. They might move to Georgia or North Carolina, but they're less likely to, move across the country. We do think there will be some of that, but that's kind of what some of these models are showing.
Any other questions or comments? Not hearing any. Thank you so much for your presentation.
In the interest of time, so we can give you all a chance to give us your updates, we are going to skip the climate action planning agenda item with the support of my colleagues that we're going to give the presentation. Because I think we're expecting a pretty robust conversation about that and a lot of questions and discussion. So we're actually going to put this probably on the agenda for our first workshop in November. So a little preview of that. So if that's okay with everybody, we're going to do that. So thank you to my colleagues for suggesting that so we can move on.
We do look forward to that presentation, though. Moving the agenda along, our next up are legislative updates. CMAP staff, will provide an update on relevant bills filed with the Illinois General Assembly. And this will be presented by our Intergovernmental Affairs Specialist, Ryan Gujas. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. First, I just want to clarify that it looks as if in your packet, the July Climate Committee Ledge update memo was included, and that was done in error, so please forgive me. I'll read through some of my talking points and just give an update, but we'll make sure to get that updated on our website so you all can have access to the regional economy Ledge update memo that'll outline legislation that is relevant or is important to this group. So thank you. I know it's been a while since we've met, and before our last meeting, the General Assembly was still kind of working through some legislative initiatives and passing the FY25 budget. So I'll provide just a brief update on that and then just go through some other items. So the governor has signed the FY25 budget appropriation bill. It's now Public Act 103-0589, and also the Budget Implementation Act, or the BIMP, which is now Public Act 103-0588. The FY25 budget appropriates roughly $53.1 billion in operating and capital expenditures. Just a few key items that we wanted to touch on. There are one-time transfers from the road fund at amount of 75 million, and also the leaking underground storage tank fund an amount of 50 million into the public transportation fund. These aren't new revenues, but rather they shift the burden from the public transportation fund away from the general revenue fund. The FY25 budget also appropriates 400 million from the road fund to IDOT and directs spending on D1 projects that primarily serve economically distressed communities. Something else we want to highlight is one of CMAP's legislative initiatives, which is our RPA modernization bill. The governor signed several bills into law this summer. One of those was Senate Bill 3389, or what we again refer to as the Regional Planning Act Modernization Bill. Just as a reminder, this bill makes some slight adjustments to the Regional Planning Act or CMAP's enabling statute, including reducing the number of board members in office needed to take action on specific administrative matters to a simple majority, and that takes effect January 1 of 2025. So we're really excited about getting that over the finish line. We're still working on our RPA appropriation legislation where we're seeking some additional funding from the, I shouldn't say additional funding, some initial funding from the General Assembly. So more to come on that, in the upcoming veto in spring legislative session. I know Michael Brown kind of touched on this as well, but right, the transit, we've been seeing the Senate Transportation Committee and some legislative action on that. This summer has been busy, right, with the Senate Transportation Committee hearings around the region on transit service improvements. The IGA team, we've been closely monitoring these hearings and responding to legislator inquiries as they arise. Again, as Michael Brown mentioned, Speaker Welch also recently announced the formation of a House working group focused on transit. We've also been in touch with them to provide them with part-related resources and to help guide their work as well. Outside of that, since we last met, we've been continuing to spend our summer meeting with legislators to share more about our work that we have underway. We have discussed a variety of topics, of course, transportation, but also climate, water, housing, to really help convey the breadth of CMAP's work with our state legislative delegation. It's also been a good opportunity to strengthen some existing relationships and also build some new ones. Other than that, like I mentioned before, the Climate Committee was included in your packet. So that, again, that was done in ERA. So we'll make sure to get that updated on our website so that you all can see the legislation that we've been tracking and that's highlighted for the Regional Economy Committee. Other than that, I'm happy to take any questions. Are there any? Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Our next agenda item will be updates from our committee members. So are there any updates that our committee members would like to share?
Hi, Kendra Freeman with Metropolitan Planning Council. I guess our biggest update is we welcomed a new CEO on Monday, Dan Lurie, who many of you may know formally from his time in the Mayor's Policy Office under Mayor Lightfoot. So officially he'll start September 30th. I'm like, what month is this? But y'all hopefully got the e-blast. So that's probably the biggest update for us.
That's a big one. Thank you.
Will provide an update for Main Street America, who is a child of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So you all may be aware that we've also announced the new CEO. She's about 9 months into her tenure at Main Street America, Erin Barnes. Patrice Fry was our CEO. I've also recently been promoted effective July 1st to our Chief Programs Officer, so not leading the work directly in Chicago as I had in the past. Our work is also coming to an end with the City of Chicago. We'd worked with the City of Chicago as a part of their Invest Southwest program, which we cannot say on the streets anymore. So that contract is coming to an end September 30th. However, the 15 Chicago local main streets that we're working with will now fall under the administration of the Illinois Main Street program, which is funded through the Lieutenant Governor's office. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, updates? All right. Not hearing any, we can move on to the next agenda item, which is other business. Is there any other business before the committee today? All right, hearing none, we're now at the public comment portion of our agenda. This is an opportunity for comments from the members of the audience. We will take public comments from individuals who are in the audience first, followed by remote participants, and then followed by written comments. So in that order, are there any comments from the public? Not seeing any from our in-person audience. What about our remote participants?
I think I saw a chat pop up.
Okay, in the chat, given the discussion about utilizing the existing transit system for transit-oriented development and multimodal hubs, how much consideration has been given to expanding the current transit system and greenway system both locally and across the region to spur economic development?
We have a staff member that can answer this question, or is this a situation where we need to follow up with the remote participant?
I can do a preliminary answer, happy to follow up if they have more questions. So I think we'll be exploring both options within the RTP. It is very important for us to consider preserving our existing transportation system as a historical region that has lots of really great infrastructure already, but the regionally significant projects aspect of the RTP will explore further potential other projects that we would like to consider.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from our remote participants? Okay, not hearing any. Do we have any written comments? Okay, well, let's move on to the next meeting. So the next workshop, / meeting is tentatively scheduled for Thursday, November 14th of this year. And again, this is going to be held virtually via Zoom. Without any additional business, I think we're ready for adjournment, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Christy. Can I get a second? Seconded by Kendra Freeman. Is there any discussion? All right, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. The committee meeting has been adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.